This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From custom domains to beautiful websites using their easily customizable templates that you can have up and running in minutes, e-commerce, email and email marketing, SEO, analytics, and scheduling, Squarespace does it all and has done it for us for the last 11 years. If you are a small to mid-sized business in any industry, Squarespace is the place to go for all of your website needs. Hop over to www.squarespace.com/Hugh for a free trial. And if you like what you see and want to move forward, receive 10% off your first order by using the discount code Hugh at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. And by Helium Design Lab, our latest thinking applied to Leica's most advanced and versatile workhorse system camera, the SL3 series. Anti-theft, anti-tamper, no futs. Arca Swiss compatible, no QR plate required. Peak Design Capture clip compatible, no QR plate required. Apple AirTag compatible. Custom right lower lug equip. Improved handling. For the first time, QD Quick Detach Disconnect compatible for bigger, heavier lenses. Thoroughly considered and beautifully executed. Not that we're biased or anything. 5-axis CNC machine from a single block of aluminum, hand-assembled and individually inspected all here in the US. Designed exclusively for Leica's SL3 series, Helium SL3, priced at $320 and available at www.heliumlab.design. Hey everybody, I'm Hugh Brownstone for Three Blind Men and an Elephant, and this is going to be a relatively maybe short video because I think I understand precisely what it is I'm seeing in Leica's $6,690 44 megapixel SL3P. And that is this. A. An SL3 body updated with content credential hardware and the sensor and processor, give or take, of their L-Mount Alliance and L-Squared technology partner Panasonic's 44 megapixel Lumix S1R2. A phenomenal camera in its own right. Any differences between the two cameras beyond this primarily, or perhaps exclusively, a function of smart and relatively inexpensive software tweaks and firmware choices. Well, also updated, that is on the SL3P, with the removal of the red dot like all P models and the introduction of white lettering, first blacked out on the SL3S. But hey, the performance of the S1R Mark II, the experience of the SL3, and an ever-expanding lens ecosystem that equals or exceeds the big boys for breadth, depth, image quality, build quality, autofocus performance, and or value? Sounds pretty good to me. So good, I suspect not only to me, that B, I think the SL3P is Leica's Goldilocks SL3, the one SL3 to have when you're having only one. Why do I think so? Well, first, from both price and functionality perspectives, the partnership with Panasonic allows Leica to slot the SL3P between the SL3 and the SL3S. It's about 10% less expensive than the original photographer first $7,548 61 megapixel SL3, which I own and love. 23% more expensive than the videographer first $5,665 24 megapixel SL3S, and offers advantages over both while giving up precious little in the real world for most of us, including autofocus superior to both, the aforementioned hardware-based content credentials not found in either, blackout-free burst rates up to 40 frames per second for stills unmatched by either, while simultaneously offering the higher 8K video resolution of the SL3, with faster readout speed, about the same as the faster SL3S, while pushing through almost twice the megapixels. Video assists like false color and waveform, you get the idea. Second, as it is a more complete hybrid, and for some of us a more capable hybrid than either the SL3 or SL3S alone, The SL3P becomes dramatically smaller, lighter, and less expensive if, like me, you use different tools for different jobs. As in the $6,690 I just mentioned and 850 grams with battery and media for the SL3P alone, versus over $10,000 and about 1.6 kilos for my current do-it-all solution consisting of A, my own 61 megapixel SL3 for my personal street work, when I want weather sealing, the highest autofocus hit rate, and greatest versatility within my gear portfolio. B, a 24 megapixel Lumix S1 Mark II for our YouTube video work, both as our daily driver here in the Batcave and our go-to for highest quality B-roll, including rolling shutter performance notably superior to the SL3, SL3S, S1R2 actually, and SL3P. Hold that thought for another video altogether because there are hacks for reducing readout speed on the S1R2 and by extension the SL3P to S12 levels. I don't really care. And C, a trio of S5 IIs for our 3 camera shoots typically involving conversations. Those size, weight, and price differentials would make anyone pick up and take notice. Third, I suspect this also makes the SL3P the first SL3 with real Conquest sales potential, but that's because it's not just about cameras anymore, and in point of fact, it never was. 8 years on since the L-mount alliance was first announced, not only have the gaps in specs and actual performance between the merely very good and the very, very best cameras and lenses across full-frame systems narrowed dramatically, especially when it comes to autofocus, but the L-mount lens ecosystem in particular has become absolutely first tier in terms of breadth, depth, performance, and value. Taken on its own, the SL3P is dramatically more expensive than the $3,900 45 megapixel Canon R5 II, $3,400 46 megapixel Nikon Z8, $3,300 61 megapixel Sony A7 R5, or $4,500 67 megapixel A7 R6. But every one of these cameras has its own set of trade-offs, and the SL3P, courtesy of the L-mount alliance and L-squared technology, raises this question: is the Leica experience, combined with Panasonic's latest electronics, improved autofocus, and the potentially dramatic cost savings available by going with Sigma or Panasonic glass over OEM, Canon, Nikon, or Sony glass, sufficiently compelling for people to make the switch? Let's take a closer look at the trade-offs the SL3P offers. The first trade-off remains price. And let's start here because there's just no way around it. And I'd be remiss if I didn't address it directly. If the Leica experience is not paramount to you, or you are simply budget constrained, the SL3P's primary competitor is the S1R2. As I just said, an exceptional camera in its own right. Good enough, after all, for Leica to base its SL3P internals on it. And at $3,000, give or take a buck or two, it's less than half the price. You do give up Leica's heritage, 10/10 build quality and feel in hand, industrial design, excellent and relatively uncluttered menu system, IP rating, hardware-based content credentialing. Once again, you get the idea. But there are certain things the S1R2 has that the SL3P does not, beginning with a more articulable rear panel and something as simple as shutter angle that videographers will really appreciate, or a manual of arms or autofocus UI that some of us may prefer. These, however, are not the only trade-offs to be considered. As for me, this is why I will not be trading in my SL3 for the SL3P. I like to keep my personal gear separate from my professional gear. Different use cases require different priorities and headspaces. I don't need what the SL3P gives me that the SL3 does not. I do need what the SL3 gives me that the SL3P does not. And I either want or need some things neither camera can give me. 1. Resolution. While the loss of 17 megapixels will not be a deal breaker for 99% of us, 99% of the time, I am loath to give them up. Claudia and I both use high-resolution sensors to the max as an alternative path to narrower fields of view instead of using larger, heavier lenses. This makes sense for us out on the street. I don't currently print, or to be more accurate, have prints made for me larger than 60 inches on the long side. But when I look closely at the one metal print in our home shot with a 45 megapixel Canon R5, as it turns out, as I do every day, look at all of these every day, I miss the detailed texture of the city I get from our other large metal prints, often cropped much more tightly, all done with one of our 61 megapixel Leicas or Sonys. Of course, lenses play the critical role in sharpness, in chromatic aberration correction, blah, 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 but I think I've been around long enough to take that into account. 2. Dynamic range. The human eye is good for about 20 stops of DR. My SL3 maxes out at about 15 stops of DR. And I do use exposure bracketing, when I can, to manage the distance between them. The SL3P gives up 1 stop of dynamic range to the SL3, 14 stops. Now, you might not think this makes a difference, but I've had the experience, while shooting urban landscapes especially, of either not having the time to set up the bracket or not having the frame amenable to a bracket, typically like subjects in motion. It actually took just one otherwise lovely image with blown highlights from a camera spec to just under 14 stops to learn my lesson. 3. Readout speed. The SL3P offers notably better readout speed than my SL3, closing in on A7R6 territory, in turn essentially equal to the readout speeds of the SL3S while processing almost twice the megapixel count. But I rarely shoot photographs where this matters. I don't shoot video where this matters, ever. In fact, I can only recall a single shot where it did, shooting the Brooklyn skyline across the river while being whisked down the FDR Drive in an Uber. But if I absolutely needed the fastest readout speeds on a regular basis, specifically for rolling shutter artifacts, and I was willing to trade off resolution, I'd look at an R5 II, Z8, FX3, or the S1 Mark II. 4. I'm happy with the autofocus performance of my SL3 for what I do. Next, I think there might be 1 or 3 firmware updates Leica could make that would matter to me and which I imagine ought to be available on the original SL3 and SL3S, beginning with this. 5. Shutter angle, rather than shutter speed, in video mode. I've mentioned this many times before on the channel, but I'll bring it up again, especially since the S1R2 does have shutter angle, but the SL3P does not, or at least I couldn't find it. This would eliminate futzing with shutter speed every time I change frame rate, and I've grown to count on this for our video work. 6. One-touch autofocus mode toggle, or toggles, using 1, maybe 2 function buttons. Let me explain. Out on the street, I typically use one of 3 autofocus modes. A, eye detection within a relatively constrained but movable area for street portrait when I'm engaging with people directly and co-creating the shot. B, tracking when I'm following someone or walking backwards and staying in front of someone as I wait for the background to suit me. Or C, oldie but goodie, fixed center point focus and recompose when I'm trying to thread the needle and capture one person within a crowd at speed. I don't want a 3-step process to change autofocus mode out on the street. That takes too long. I'd like to press a function button once to switch between two predetermined modes, perhaps a double press to switch on or off a variant like eye detection. This would be huge for me. Thinking about this and shutter angle, interesting, isn't it? How the smallest of details can make bigger differences than headline features, right? You know what? 7. I'd also like to see a fundamental rethink of how profiles are handled. The entire process is counterintuitive and inconsistent to me, far less clear than it ought to be, especially compared to, well, actually, how it's done on Lumix cameras. It's so counterintuitive on the SL3 series, again, to me, out of character for the rest of the menu system, again, to me, that I've actually steered clear of profiles on my SL2 and SL3 for years. Yeah, I just said that out loud. In my short time with this SL3P, I still couldn't figure out how to recall a particular profile, this profile, 8K, 2398, MOV, H.265, medium bitrate, 35mm frame, like a monochrome high contrast. Right, you probably saw this coming. The profile you've been watching this entire time recorded on the SL3P, matched with the Lumix S24-60 f2.8, which does serve as our daily driver here in the Batcave on an S1 plain Jane Mark II. At least it stayed in memory when I turned the camera off and was still there when I turned it back on. But it took me half a dozen tries before I just gave up and said, okay, that's great. Finally, there are other specific hardware trade-offs or changes that I might have to wait for in an SL4 or 5, or look to another camera altogether because Leica didn't make them in the SL3P and then didn't make them in the SL4 or 5. I'll begin with this. 8. Unlike the S1R2, the SL3P body is not designed from the get-go for active cooling. And in fact, it did overheat and shut down around the 25-minute mark right here in the Batcave, where it's a cool and dry 67 degrees Fahrenheit, which scuttled the take before this one. Nicht gut. Then again, I experienced overheating on the S1R2, first time I tested it at 4K. I'd assumed it would operate as flawlessly as our trio of actively cooled Lumix S5 IIs. So confident, I didn't think to turn on the high heat bypass nor swing out the rear panel. Second time around with the SL3P using this profile, I waited until the camera was at this nice cool room temperature. I tilted out the rear panel. I kept the card door open, and I recorded to SD card only. At this precise moment, we'll still see what happens. Success, clearly. But I don't need 8K anyway. There's certainly no utility looking that closely at this mug. I don't need the storage and processing overhead in any case. And who needs the headache of playing chicken with thermal shutdown? Of course, your mileage may vary, and as always, that's fine. Recording to an external SSD is possible with the SL3P through the USB-C port, although I personally don't need the futzing. And, oh yeah, I was never able to find a high-temp bypass setting either. Anyway, as I said, different equipment for different use cases, optimized for each. That is how I roll, and I recognize how fortunate I am to be able to do that. Moving on. 9. I'd like to see the EVF upgraded to the same 9.44 million dot unit currently found only in Sony's latest A7R6. The reality is I would be happy with the previous 9.44 million dot unit found in our Sony a7R5, but the reason for the upgrade is as simple as this. I've found, and I'm just one person, that I cannot consistently achieve critical focus with super fast manual focus M-glass on any Leica camera, including my SL3, the same EVF used in the SL3P, but I can with our a7R5. I'm talking about shooting wide open. 10. I wish Leica would add a threaded shutter release with improved shutter feel. Other than changing the color of the shutter release of the SL3P from silver to black, I forgot to mention that earlier, it feels unchanged from my SL3. Fair enough, I wouldn't have expected anything else, but I've found this to be suboptimal when wearing gloves. Sometimes simply under pressure to get the shot. I get so excited my finger doesn't land exactly where the shutter release is. The soft shutter releases available from Leica and others help by increasing the surface area and travel distance of the shutter. I also wish, however, that Leica would upgrade the tactile quality and responsiveness of the shutter release. I wish it were faster. All of this remains unchanged from the SL3 on the P. 11. I think focus breathing control for video and macro work would be especially useful with the reference standard Apo Summicron SL series primes because they breathe. I'm talking about what I've actually experienced with the 35 and 90. I suspect this may be a processor issue, but if not, this could be a killer firmware upgrade for Leica Video. 12. I look forward to the day when some dedicated hybrid camera has a 2-channel wireless receiver built into the body from the get-go, a 32-bit system at that. DJI's Osmo Pocket can do it. Why not a much bigger camera? Finally, 13. I'd like an updated grip designed for the SL3 series specifically to better counter the gravitational or rotational pull of front-heavy lenses like the Apo Summicron SLs or Sigma's outstanding 70-200 2.8 L-mount zoom. I'd also love the addition of an integrated Leica finger loop connection point. I think the finger loop is brilliant on my Q3s and my M11 and could be even more beneficial on an SL3 series camera. While we're at it, I'd like to see a slightly deeper and more rounded base plate because even with its beautiful design and chamfering, over hours on the street, I begin to feel that forward weight bias digging into my right palm. Both of which, actually, are a perfect segue to two of my favorite quotes these days, one from New York Knicks guard team captain and NBA Finals MVP Jalen Brunson, who said, "Things may not go your way, but if they don't, what are you going to do about it?" The other from head of Xerox PARC's Learning Research Group, Alan Kay, who said, "The best way to predict the future is to invent it." And as a result, the newest addition to our Helium Design Lab portfolio, our most modular and most challenging design yet, because it's hard to improve upon the SL3 ergos, Helium SL3 system plate and upcoming optional palm swell with integrated Leica finger loop connection point. Oh yeah. I'll wrap it up this way. Some of us may cast aspersions on this all-in-one Goldilocks SL3P and sneer at its price, given that one can buy a Lumix S1R2 for less than half the price. I understand the calculation and prioritization. I have and use an SR1 II myself, but I don't countenance churlish behavior. It simply diminishes all of us. Fortunately, not a big issue with this audience. You guys are amazing. Others among us may be delighted at the prospect of the Leica experience in a camera significantly upgraded for many use cases, sports and wildlife, landscape, certain kinds of video, you name your own use cases, at a lower price than the SL3, at a, call it, workable price premium compared to the SL3S. Of course, I understand this too, as I do the reality that competition is fierce, and each of the competitors I've mentioned, as well as others I haven't mentioned, have their adherents, and deservedly so. For me, the bottom line is that the SL3P is the one SL3 to have when you're having only one, but I am not a one-camera kind of guy. Again, fortunate enough to be able to use what I consider to be the right piece of kit for any particular use case of ours. Which is why, as I said earlier, my SL3 is going nowhere. Our S5 are going nowhere. And why it may be many years before I feel a need to upgrade. Although maybe not. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From custom domains to beautiful websites using their easily customizable templates that you can have up and running in minutes, e-commerce, email and email marketing, SEO, analytics, and scheduling, Squarespace does it all and has done it for us for the last 11 years. If you are a small to mid-sized business in any industry, Squarespace is the place to go for all of your website needs. Hop over to www.squarespace.com/you for a free trial. And if you like what you see and want to move forward, receive 10% off your first order by using the discount code HUGH at checkout. Thanks, Squarespace. And by Helium Design Lab, our latest thinking applied to Leica's most advanced and versatile workhorse system camera, the SL3 series. Anti-theft, anti-tamper, no FUTs, Arca Swiss compatible, no QR plate required. Peak Design Capture clip compatible, no QR plate required. Apple AirTag compatible, custom right lower lug equip, improved handling. For the first time, QD Quick Detach Disconnect compatible for bigger, heavier lenses. Thoroughly considered and beautifully executed. Not that we're biased or anything. 5-axis CNC machine from a single block of aluminum, hand-assembled and individually inspected all here in the US. Designed exclusively for Leica's SL3 series, Helium SL3, priced at $320 and available at www.heliumlab.design. If you like what you've seen here today, please give a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, join the conversation in the comment section below because this is an exceptional audience. If you'd like help with a portfolio review, gear selection, finding or honing your artistic voice, sign up for a one-on-one mentoring video call via Zoom at 3bmep.com/booking. Finally, please consider supporting our work by using the no-cost you affiliate links down below, sending us coffee money via PayPal, or most especially, joining us on Patreon, links down below as well. However you choose to support us, as always, we thank you for it.